Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here, joined by Melissa Griffith for a very special episode. This is a very special episode. It was supposed to be part of the hype show that was gearing up for the South by Southwest live event. Live, coming at you live from Austin. It was about to happen. It was going to drop like it was hot. We all had our reservations. We were flying down to Austin. We were going to live large. It's a fun conference. It was going to be great. And then this little thing called the coronavirus happened. Melissa, we got to do a show. We got to talk about this because it is trending, and it's certainly trending in conferences, and it's also trending in education. So Dan and I did a show on the coronavirus. I think it was in early February. So we were on this for a little while. We knew it was coming, but it's here, and it's impacting our lives directly. So Melissa, how you doing? What's going on?
I am not in Austin. That's all I can say. I am not in Austin. That's where I should be right now. I should be hanging out at a hotel pool, just enjoying life.
Yeah.
Preparing to do South by Southwest. But I'm doing good otherwise, Safety first. We have to say that. As much as we may sound bitter on this show because South by Southwest got canceled, I am a firm believer in safety first.
Yeah, and we should definitely talk a little bit about that. You have been saying you're living the dream. Right? It's your best life.
I am. I'm living my best life, and South by Southwest apparently wasn't in my life this year. It is what it is.
Yeah. So I want to get back to that and talk a little bit about that. But just for context, for folks who may not have heard, although I think most of our listeners probably have heard, late Friday, the city of Austin, the mayor basically said South by Southwest can't happen, and the organizers of South by Southwest and South by Southwest EDU complied with the direction of the mayor of Austin. And I was scheduled to fly out 8 a.m. Saturday morning. So it was about as late as possible for me to be canceled on. And then I think we're supposed to fly out Sunday, Melissa,
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah, I was good. I was scheduled for a flight I was sure to miss this morning at 6 a.m. The time change.
Just stay up. Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah,
it's great.
but it is, we're living in interesting times. That was part of the idea when we first started talking about the coronavirus, and it is causing like a mass psychological phenomenon. There is mass hysteria. It is, we talked about it on the previous show. It did go viral. Like the social media part of the coronavirus is super interesting. And Melissa, I know you were just sharing your screen.
Yes.
Yeah, I know you're monitoring the big map of cases just to curate that, because that's a useful place to look. It's out of Johns Hopkins. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess I came across this map maybe like a week ago when I was monitoring whether South by Southwest was going to get canceled or not. So it's a Johns Hopkins case map. It tracks a lot of different things. If you haven't seen it, we'll post a link to it. It tells you real time how many confirmed cases, how many deaths, how many recoveries. And the thing that I like about it, and which is what I use it more as a fan of data, it shows you exactly where they're located, and it's very cool. But the thing I've always been pointing people to is to look at the trends rather than the aggregate number, because the amount of cases is slow, and they do a good job of graphing that. The amount of people recovering from it is spiking, which means that two things are happening. Because people are catching it earlier, they're able to treat it better, and it's clearly. And so I see it as a reason for optimism and calm rather than a reason for hysterical, which is what I think the news hypes this way too much in my liking.
Right. Just the combination of news, like broadcast news, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, the broadcast networks, and then the echo chamber in social media, like the combination of those two things makes it pretty much impossible to shut this off. Yeah. Although it's not entirely impossible. I was, talking to you, Melissa, coming in, going out to a park is a healthy thing. Yes. The air is freshest in a park. I did get out, Robin, my wife, and Matthew, my son, we got out for a walk. That's actually a good thing, especially if while you're walking, you're not checking your phone to see what's happening about the coronavirus. So like there is a there is a this just in breaking news element that makes it impossible to talk about anything else, because you're always going to be getting more cases. We were also saying, like, if we tracked the flu as maniacally as we're tracking the coronavirus, people would never leave their homes. Arguably, people will be leaving their homes less. That was the macro trend we were looking at anyway. I think that trend may be accelerating, and stuff like this accelerates it. Any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I joke, but don't let a good pandemic go to waste, right? Like this will allow a lot more of a move to online, a lot more of a move to people like Amazon has got to be doing well in this environment, right. Because like more people are ordering in, although Amazon had their first cases of it, so that may cause some mass hysteria. But yeah, I think what this is going to do more than anything else is schools are going to realize they're being caught off guard. So a lot of schools are going to scramble of what to do if they shut down. I think the state of New Jersey just declared that they will allow homeschooling to come towards the days. And that's awesome. It would be, but homeschooling requires you to actually have someone at home to school you.
Right.
That's going to cause a problem for working parents and so forth. So I think schools need to be figuring out the hybrid approach, right? Where if this situation happens again for whatever reason, that they have a place, then they have something to go. So I think for the companies who are ahead of it, getting in on that, it's gonna help.
Yeah, contingency planning and being able to deliver as someone who who's done live online for years, synchronous online, that should accelerate. I would think folks are going to have more readiness. I know USC and Stanford are both. Stanford, I think, is fully moving its classes online, partly because there have been cases cited. That is one of the hot spots is right around Stanford, and then USC, I think, is experimenting with this just because they have the capacity, and I think it's also a place where the organizations and universities and schools that have the capacity to quickly go digital as an alternative, I think they're going to be flexing that capability. And then the organizations and schools and universities that don't have that capability are going to be looking to close that gap quickly, because it does seem like we'll see more stuff like this. And that's certainly interesting. I mean, that's a trend that we're going to want to continue to track.
Yeah, I agree with you. The other thing that's interesting to me is you talk about the conferences and you talk about the value of face-to-face. And that's the thing that's going to have to get figured out as well, because as much as I think South by Southwest can have an opportunity, and I think there've been rumors that they're going to do some sort of virtual South by Southwest.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a cool thing, right? But one of the benefits, and I don't know if it's set up, one of the benefits of going to something like South by Southwest is the interaction, getting to meet people, exchanging the business cards, and so forth. And how do you translate something like that into the digital world? I'm not sure they've figured out. We've been experimenting with that in a connected workforce for years, right? And and the question is, can you do it? Is it as good to have these conversations over the Zoom room, or for example?
Right. And does it count as drinking alone if you're having a cocktail while in a virtual happy hour? I would say no. I don't think that's drinking alone.
I've said it's definitely not drinking alone. Not that you and I do that on a regular basis or anything. I think it's fine. I think it is a form of interaction, and I think it's helpful.
Yeah, and it's also you're interacting with people you wouldn't have interacted with otherwise. Yeah. And then I think there is the element of serendipity around face-to-face interactions, and you're in the buffet line, you're doing all these things, you're shaking hands, all these things pre-corona that sounded lovely. Now whenever I talk about it, I'm like, danger zone, wrist point, put on your hazmat suit.
I gotta be honest,
these droplets are everywhere.
I've never liked a buffet, and I definitely don't like a buffet right now. I've never liked a buffet because of this reason. Yeah. I'm not paranoid. I'm just practical.
It may play. I mean, honestly, I think you're right, because as a networker, I never know where to how do you eat and talk to people at the same time? I need to focus on what I'm focusing on, and then also I think the idea that some of the networking, some of the ice breaking can happen when people are more in their comfort zone of their home. It is an interesting concept, and it's something that I think we're going to see more of. I did want to go where you're going too. I think the economics of conferences, and then the knock-on impact to cities that run conferences, the economic impact of this is huge. I mean, the income loss that Austin is seeing, for example, for canceling South by Southwest, it's been quoted, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. I think I saw it.
Yeah, last year
500 million. I thought I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, I think last year they made like 435 million. It was the estimated quote around. This year they were projected around 380 was the number I saw.
Okay.
But now, the thing that's interesting, right? So it goes both ways, and who knows? The rumor mills and the Twitterverse that I've been stalking on the South by Southwest conference is interesting, and who knows what's true. So there was a lot of trending stuff on it when it broke that South by Southwest was canceled. And one of the things was like spare a thought for the lost income, because a lot of the wait staff and a lot of the social staff and the restaurants and the bars, like this is where they make like half their money comes during this period for the full year. So a lot of them were talking about that, but at the same time, like who knows which one is true, and the truth is probably in the middle. It was a lot of the locals who were also saying they didn't want it there, right? And so as a wait staff, I think you're both like worried about your economic future, but pretty much relieved that you're not dealing with all the drunkards who are sneezing all over the place, dropping their stuff and so forth. So I think there's an element of they're probably safer because like hundreds, thousands of people did not descend on them, but they're also probably wondering how are they going to make back their money. So I guess if you're in Texas, tip your wait staff. Tip them well, and if you're not in Texas, when this is over, go to Texas and tip your wait staff. That's what I'm going to say.
Right. Yeah, and at the same time, I think it's easy to miss the fact that this cancellation is part of another larger trend. It was driven in part by Change.org petition that got a lot of action. Yeah. The idea that whether you're in Austin or not, whether you're an epidemiologist or not, one of the ways in which you can activate is to respond to a petition, and those petitions can get large events to be canceled. To be clear, this event may have been canceled regardless of whether there was a Change.org petition, but it is interesting that the activation through social media can then drive change in the real world.
Yeah.
Many times that's a good thing. In this case, it was probably a good thing, but there is the reality that we're much more risk averse. It reminds me of the precogs from Minority Report. It's sort of like somebody was imagining a really negative scenario. It winds up being a numbers game. When you have 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 people or more, the chance that a handful of them face a really dire outcome is relatively high. And that's true whether the coronavirus were there or not. Now you have the likelihood that a handful of them will get the coronavirus. And the exposure is mainly media exposure is the reason. And then obviously some liability. So maybe you're sued. But I feel like it's more the impact to the brand would be so negative, and the likelihood that those negative narratives, those stories would emerge. It's after the Fire Festival, right? Where that it's still in oh my God, it's just blowing my mind. But anyway, any thoughts on that?
Which one? You said Fire Festival, and I went, oh right, that thing. No, look, here is I was contemplating whether I was going to go down, regardless of whether they canceled it or not. Everyone has got to make this decision for themselves. So there are a couple of thoughts I have on this. One, I think the media coverage of this, and we said it already, is overblown. I think we live in a world where information is thrown at you 24/7, and that generally leads to unhappy lives because ignorance is bliss. And in a case like this, you would not have known that this virus was spreading so ferociously if we weren't in this information age. Yep. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Time will tell, right? Because yes, there's probably a lot of caution in it, and people are cautious in it, but it probably will contain it a lot quicker than if people were not worried about it. So I don't know. I will say a couple things. South by Southwest, I am still 50-50 on how they actually handled it, because there was not a lot of news about what they were going to do leading up to it. And I remember telling you, I think they're leaving it up to Austin, and Austin's going to cancel it
Yeah.
At the late, because you could see the social pressure building on the
Sure.
city of Austin, and
Yeah.
they had far more to lose than South by Southwest.
Right.
If
And
they
it's
were
also,
run.
and if the organizers
Yeah,
have someone else who makes the decision, they're not
yeah,
they're already going to get beat up by the people who
yeah,
wanted to attend the event. And if they cancel it themselves, it's more likely they get the backlash than if they're told by the mayor to cancel. I think
yeah.
it's an easier way to manage the cancellation.
It is, but the fact that they seem to have not had contingency plans in place, and
Mm.
maybe I'm unfair to them, but the fact that they didn't have an alternate strategy if it got canceled was like,
Yeah.
seems like they were not planning as a business should for
Right.
the worst case scenario. Because this was, for me, a pretty possible outcome that they were going to
Yeah.
cancel it late in the game.
Yeah. And
So,
and
I don't
maybe
think
the yeah, and to your point, the jury may be out too,
yeah,
because like what's the plan now? And then also it is one of those contingency planning, we talk about it a lot,
yeah,
where like what's the likelihood of a miss, and then what's how impactful is it, should impact how much you plan for it. And this became a relatively likely scenario that was extremely
yeah,
impactful. So like those are the ones
yes,
that should bubble up rather than crossing your fingers and hoping that you'll be able to sort of get it in under the wire. But then at the same
yeah,
time, like the city and the government has been slow, just generally. Even right now, when you're talking about the Johns Hopkins map,
yes,
that's reflecting the tests that are actually out there and the confirmed cases that we know about. It doesn't actually track the actual cases. And when you see a nice data viz on a map,
yeah,
looks kind of like war games, like you can see the little explosions
yeah.
in the places where it's dangerous. It has a certain level of truthiness to it. But then if you sort of pull back and understand the reality under it, I would agree with your pushback on it is smart that this thing was canceled. I think it was
Yeah.
just more that it was canceled very late. And then the response plan to the cancellation didn't seem like it was ready. Doesn't seem like it's ready yet. I think there's still a little bit of backpedaling to try to get organized about this. But I think it's an economic consideration too, because the city is losing a lot of revenue. So
No, and I agree, and but that's the reality of the situation, right? Like that is what I am. If I'm holding South by Southwest accountable for anything, is they should have had a plan in place for this. They could have had a plan in place that said it was started planning with the city of Austin. Look, we know you haven't made a decision. Push it to May, push it to June, like do something, like let us have a backup plan so that there was and you could have had the courage knowing that you could see that that petition was rising. That petition has been out there for 3 weeks
yeah,
and gaining a lot of traction. Twitter has been gaining a lot of traction. When the companies, high profile companies started to pull out, those were
yeah,
all opportunities for South by Southwest and the city of Austin, both of them. Let's hold them both accountable equally to say,
yeah,
look, it's not worth it at this point. We're gonna do this, and we're gonna have this plan in place. Either go some virtually, go
yeah,
something like that. Because right now, I think we're sitting here, and not us, but there are a lot of people sitting there, no idea whether they're getting their refunds back, no
right,
idea whether the hotel's money are back. Like all those things should have had a plan in place, in my opinion, and
right,
that would have helped. That would have shown a lot more courage and a lot more like understanding on the part of the event planners.
right.
Like this was an again foreseeable outcome,
Mhm.
which means you should have planned for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll see. I think we're going to learn more.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll hear more because we are close to the organizers too.
Yes.
So, like, I do empathize with what anyone who was involved in running
Yeah.
these conferences was going through, because to do that on your own, I think is
Yes.
difficult, and then ultimately it rolls all the way up to the top, and then meanwhile, there's no communication from the federal government about this type
Yeah.
of thing. The
And
CDC is not saying, is not mandating any of these cancellations. I think they're allowing this to be managed at a local city level. And that is also interesting to understand too, like how much is falling on mayors in our large urban centers to address both the outbreak and then also the policy making, because this
yeah,
isn't the type of thing that will be managed from the federal government on down. I don't want to go in depth into how President Trump has been handling this,
Yeah.
but it hasn't really, there hasn't been any leadership from
No,
there aside from, it's the same thing you're talking about. It's like crossing your fingers. I hope our numbers are low. And then we all know the numbers are kind of false to begin with. Like the numbers are going to underreport, just like Hurricane Maria's numbers were underreported.
yeah, but that's for sure. Look, and I am sympathetic as someone who also works in a large organization where, like every organization, this is uncharted territories for everyone. So you got to be sympathetic to it, and it is being left up to organizations and local city. Right? There is no direction on what to do here. That could be the way like America chooses to run their government, like everyone decide for themselves. But it is that we are in unprecedented times, and
Right.
so like it may call for more leadership from the top. Like my brother and I were joking about it, like who's in charge of this on our side? It's Vice President Pence, right? And I'm not knocking Vice President Pence, but he is a politician. In England, they put a doctor at the head that is working out that that's the person that's like doing the response. And that is a different approach, because that is saying, look, this is an epidemic and we are going to treat it as such, versus this is a political crisis that we have to manage, because it is not. And
exactly. And not to mention the difference in how the healthcare system in the UK works, considering that they do have national healthcare there.
Yeah.
It makes sense to then allow that to be managed from the top as a healthcare consideration, because the government, already is responsible for national healthcare. In the US, where it's more distributed between states and the federal government, I think that's where it's likely that the response is going to continue to be pocketed. You're going to see flare-ups and issues in the US that you won't see in other countries. We may be lucky that we don't have as much of the disease that's actually native to the US, but I think the response, unlike in China, where again, it seems like they similarly were slow to respond, but then by the time they were able to respond as an authoritarian regime with, a command economy, they can just say, this is what we're doing. We're affecting this right now. In the US, you have to win the hearts and minds. If an individual wants to do something that puts them at risk, which then really extends that risk to others, we were a very, libertarian society in that way, where we do allow individuals to act on their own here. And I think that's a place where, the cancellation of South by Southwest, I think, was a signal that this is serious and that things are going to start changing in a more fundamental way. I was talking to someone from Singapore the other day who was saying, again, optimistically, was saying that things seem to be getting better, but for 3 weeks, it was mandated that everyone was going to work from home. It wasn't left to individual organizations. It wasn't left to individuals. And there were certain measures taken to check to see whether someone who was going to a public space or a public event, whether or not they were running a fever. And they were able to get that off the ground. That's the type of thing that I don't know whether the US will ever enact something like that. So what I would anticipate is heavy underreported incidents of this, particularly among folks of lower socioeconomic status, because I think they A, may not believe what's being told to them, and then B, they may not get the message, and then C, they may not have the luxury of staying home because their life requires them to, maybe they're driving an Uber, or maybe they're working multiple jobs that require manual labor of some kind, that require them to physically be present in a populous area where they may contract the disease. And then when they contract it, they may not have the healthcare to address it. So I would anticipate this to linger in the US. The only countervailing point is that we're coming out of flu season. So I think the risk, the risk should subside and it's been such a warm year anyway. So if spring hits, the US warms up, there is some conservatism around going to these big public events. It does seem like we'll get through this by, say, late April into May. Like, I think things will start to return to normal, but it seems like it could wind up being much worse than it could have been. And then it all gets back to the precogs. Like, how do you prevent bad things from happening? And it's particularly difficult in a society where we value individual freedom so much.
Yeah, you've touched on a lot of topics there. I can go so many places. Like, we have already established this because we've seen it in other places, that we in the East Coast live in this hyped bubble, right? So I have no idea what Nebraska or South Dakota or like Montana, what's the level of knowledge that's in those areas? Like, are they getting the same sort of hype circle? And plus, I was thinking they probably are also not getting as much of the infused folks coming in from other countries that are bringing it here, right? So they're probably also not facing that. So to the extent that there are not a lot of people going in and out of these places, it may be fine. But I have no idea what that echo chamber looks like because I've never been there. But I have to imagine they're probably not getting as much of the crazy, but they're probably also not as exposed to it. So I guess what I'm thinking is maybe I'm moving to Montana.
Well, because you're looking at the heat map, right? You're looking at river.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, the heat map is still up in front of me, and it's like. So on that note, that's where I'm going to end it today. Maybe I'm moving to Montana.
Yeah. Well, and it's also it's coming at an interesting time for us and for this show too, because like we were planning to have plenty of time to dedicate to the podcast while we were down there. Now we have that time back, so I think we're still going to use it to some extent, and then. It does seem like continuing coverage of this crisis is something that makes sense for the show because we're watching trends, and then B, the impact to education and to people's lives and the impact of the crazy media echo chambers that are causing. We didn't even get into conspiracy theory stuff.
Yes,
which
let's
is
not.
We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that.
12.
But anyway, my final parting thought, though, it reminds me of back in 2001, after September 11th, we were both in New York, at that time. I remember jokingly using the construct, like, if I stop doing this, the terrorists win. So I remember, if I stop playing poker, the terrorists win. If I stop, I was younger, if I stop going to bars, terrorists win. Happily, I will report that I still play poker and occasionally go to a bar. So take that, Al Qaeda. But I think now, if we change our behavior so much so that we all become homebound, we stop being face to face with people, we stop taking on a little bit of risk, measured risk, being smart about how we manage our risk profiles. If we all begin to hide too much and get into this dangerous spiral of fear and panic, then I think the coronavirus wins. So I think we gotta navigate. The other way the coronavirus wins is we all catch it. So like we gotta thread the needle. So like you don't want to expose yourself to foolish risk, but also you gotta continue to maintain your lifestyle, and there's lots of ways in which you can do that. So, don't just get into like, woe is me, throw your hands up in the air. It kind of sucks, but if we really let it shake us too much, then the coronavirus wins. And who wants the coronavirus?
Yeah, and for our listener in Montana, I'm coming there soon.
Welcome to Trending in Education. This segment is with Dan Strafford. What's going on?
Nothing much. Hunkering down.
Yeah, battening down the hatches?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I wonder what it's like to have unbattened hatches.
That's a very good question.
They're the ones that kind of like shutters flapping in the wind, right? Is that unbattened?
I would think so. Like Wizard of Oz, the scene where everything starts, the tornado starts coming in. I would assume those are hatches that were not battened down.
I kind of like it as, we could still workshop it, but as a band name, Unbattened Hatches.
Good one.
Not bad.
Like synth pop?
Yeah, I'm flexible. Separately, I just want to provide band naming services. So if folks are interested in band names, hit me up, Mike at Palmer Media. Yeah, Palmer.media, excuse me. Yeah. So interestingly, though, Dan, in your check-in, you didn't mention that you're not in Austin, Texas.
That is correct. The coronavirus, the COVID-19, I guess is its proper name, is how we're going about this now, has kept me home. I'm a work from home employee. Typically, I've continued to do that. So I've already been in that world, but yeah, we should have been on a flight as we record, heading down to Austin. Then obviously we were to appear Wednesday at 5 as a live podcast. It's a shame. It's a shame. I think there's obvious real life implications beyond South by Southwest itself, and we can talk about that. But it's a shame because, one, getting together, doing a live show is always fun and always is a great experience. Getting to meet like-minded people or not like-minded people in the world of education and learn and grow was a really important thing. And it's all up in the air now. What happens next, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, not to mention good food, barbecue, Torchy's breakfast tacos. If you're ever in Austin, the food will treat you right. Typically, the weather treats you right. It's just a fun town. It would have been a fun experience. I'm wondering, are we having some JOMO about it? Are we having some joy in missing it out as well? Because there are negative scenarios that could have been in play. Like, some people were going to catch it, most likely. And then that can just put a damper on everything because everyone's in a defensive footing, really, to begin with. We've had a few days to process the cancellation. Maybe I've reached the acceptance phase of DABDA, but I've come around to some of the benefits. I was going to bring my wife and son with me. Still upside of being down there, but like downside of A, living in fear, and then B, tiny chance that somebody gets sick.
Yep.
Even if that somebody's not us, it could limit our ability to travel. So like, et cetera, et cetera. It's a serious thing. The spread of these things is legit scary. When you're in that mitigation phase, people just stop moving. And if you stop moving, you stop interacting with each other, and the opportunity to transmit the disease just isn't there.
Right.
So probably the right decision.
JOMO feels right. There is a little bit of also a forced decision, right? That I didn't have to, without getting into details. My wife should not be exposed to more germs due to some health concerns. She was supposed to go as well. So to have South by Southwest and South by Southwest EDU, in fact, the city of Austin and Travis County say it's not happening, was almost a weight off our shoulders because we both wanted to go. And for her career, for my career, for what we're doing with the podcast, we all sort of wanted to stick it out and say, it'll be fine. But having them say, hey, it's not happening was a little bit of relief, to be quite honest, that I didn't have to make that choice. I'm missing out on it. But I think you're right that if you're perfectly healthy, you're 25-year-old and everything's been right as rain in your life from a health perspective, it's not necessarily about you getting sick. It's about you getting the virus and then spreading it to someone who does not have that. And it's tough, I think, for a lot of people to get that and to understand that, well, I'm perfectly healthy. Why can't I go to the movies, or why can't I go do X, Y, and Z? It's about the community. It's about the larger group. And that is a serious change of focus for some people. And at times like this, you hope those in charge can take the reins and can make the choices that are necessary to mitigate, as you said, as much of a spread as possible. Yeah.
And we'll see how it goes. Hopefully the coronavirus is of a category of viruses that includes the flu. And if it behaves like the flu and the common cold, which is also in that same category, it likely will be transmitted less as the weather gets warmer. So typically flu season is starting to wind down around now. So if the climactic change of things warming up paired with the behavioral change of people, washing their hands better, traveling less, et cetera, certainly the media is getting that information out there, so people are learning. Hopefully it settles down, and then we just need to be out ahead of it should it crop up again next winter. So hopefully that's the reality we're living in. It does remind me of the scenario-based thinking in bets. Like, there are percentage chances that things continue to get worse, and you want to be prepared in that eventuality. It's very much, managing against unfavorable outcomes, and then how unfavorable are those outcomes. So like for us who wanted to be down at South by Southwest, it's unfavorable, but it's less unfavorable than had we traveled and gotten sick, or had we traveled and gotten stuck, or had we traveled, caught something and given it to somebody else. So a little bit of nostalgia, a little wistfulness, not wispiness.
I mean, there's some wispiness in there too, but I think something we talked about before everything was canceled was the idea of bunker-based learning
Yes.
as well. And we're seeing it play out, right? So I just got a notification that Rutgers University canceled classes as of Thursday.
Yeah.
Harvard has done it. Princeton has said after spring break, you stay home. Now, universities are a little bit more at their own regard to say, hey, students, stay away, as opposed to obviously high schools, middle schools, and or public schools. But it's happening. And so how do we transition to an online learning environment for this volume? How do we make sure that students are getting the education they need? And then the secondary thing from a learning perspective, and from honestly, for my own opinion, a humanity thing, students who need school for meals, students whose parents are both working, like these become these sort of cascading effects that I don't know we all consider at the outset, that are really going to be stories of the next probably 2 to 3 months when all is said and done. Hopefully, as you said, everything fades and we're okay and we move forward. But it's a lot. There's a lot happening.
Yeah. And it's something we're going to continue to track. We'll try to bring in experts. I saw somewhere that like thousands of coronavirus podcasts are now showing up.
I can only imagine.
So we currently are not launching one. We're just going to hijack this feed occasionally, but we reserve the right to begin to talk coronavirus all day, every day, because it isn't. I mean, there's always news. There's always something new happening, and the trends I think will be interesting, particularly as they impact education. To your point, Dan, like I do think I saw someone else on Twitter posting recently. I think Jeff Salingo was saying, "What's the impact to commencement ceremonies?" Which is an interesting question. Maybe there is some trade-off around the weather as far as that goes. Maybe by the time it's warm enough, but some groups, I think even in Japan, commencement frequently happens right around now, so they're just canceling commencement. And then similarly, it's an interesting question for a university: do you cancel classes or do you run them online? And if you run them online, do you actually know how to do that with enough fidelity that you're comfortable offering it? That is an interesting thing to track, to see who's successful at it, who has challenges with it, and who says they're not even willing to take on the risk, they're just going to cancel. Same thing with conferences. So like we'll definitely be tracking what South by Southwest winds up doing as a make good virtually, because it does look like they're likely to proceed with that. And even if they don't, they're likely going to talk about why they didn't. But I think that is a real interesting question for all of this. And then if you think about the educational services of delivering these types of programs online, you would imagine there's a favorable trend, like kind of like the 2U model. Are there online platform managers or program managers who will hop in and say, oh, University X, we can get your program on quickly. Here's what it's going to cost, and we can guarantee the results. I would imagine that this will probably accelerate things for organizations that are trying to do that type of work.
So much. There's and learning adjacent, not specific learning adjacent, but the NCAA tournament. What happens there? The Ivy League just canceled their conference tournament.
Right.
So Yale is now the outright winner and gets the NCAA bid, but are they going to allow Yale to go to the NCAA tournament? Like there's a lot that influences students, what students can do, what they can't do. It's become very crazy, like drinking from the fire hydrant. Like there's just, as you said, there's constant news, constant happening. And it was a whole on IQ, I think, point about global change, like a global systemic event that changes learning. We might be living through it. I'm not predicting that, but there's a possibility here that this is that moment that things sort of turn even more so towards online learning.
Yeah, and I am in fact predicting that, because why not? If I'm wrong, who's going to catch? Oh, you'll catch me. And this is being recorded. But yeah, who knows? It does seem like some of these trends were already happening. They maybe just weren't moving that fast. And now I think this is accelerating a lot of those trends. Some of them are challenging too, because some of them are tied to social isolation and loneliness and, agoraphobia, hiding in your basement. It is where modes of interaction that feel like they're in person, telepresence, good video chat. We do record this show from different geographies, and it does feel like we're in the same place. So I do think those types of technologies that help build the same kind of connectivity that you would have face-to-face online, seeing how they lean into this solution, seeing how, and then when you're talking about sports, I do kind of, just out of curiosity, I want to see people play a US, like an NBA game in front of an empty stadium, just the
squeak of the sneakers. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's fascinating stuff. But it's something we'll continue to track. Unfortunately, we didn't make it down there, but happy that we're all healthy and still pumping out that quality content. Because if we stop podcasting, Dan, the coronavirus wins. We can't allow that to happen. Dan
Agreed.
Stratford, always a pleasure. We got to get back to the March Madness too. This is not going to interrupt our tournament, even if some of these matchups are going to have to be played in front of empty audiences. We are still going to pursue our completion here. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back again soon on Trending in Education.